Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to apologize ahead of time if you hear any coughing during this video. I've been feeling under the weather the last couple of days, so my apologies if you hear some coughing during it. But here's a drawing that I did. This is one of the first projects of the student requested series that I'm doing right now. There's going to be 3 projects that we're going to be doing. This first one is how to create a cartoon slash game character. So the first thing I did was I asked my students to draw something. It didn't have to be anything crazy. This is a drawing. It took me maybe, I don't know, about like 3 or 4 minutes to do. It doesn't have to be anything that you would submit to an art show. It just has to be just something to get on onto the computer. The first step that you want to take is you want to add a new layer. Remember that Add Pixel Layer button is right here next to the little trash can in the Layers panel. Then what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to our brush. We're going to go to Brushes, and I'm going to switch to the DAUB inks. The reason why I like to do the inks is it does give a little bit nicer of an edge. It just overall it looks like you're painting rather than just using that round brush that we would have in the basics. There's others that you can use during this. There's also the markers. The markers come out really nice as well. There's different variations of the markers as well that you could use in order to get the same effect. Actually, the markers probably might be a good version to use, but we're going to stick with the inks just because that's how we reviewed it in class. It starts off at 64 pixels. If I hold that over my image, you can see how that is way too big of a brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that down in size. Remember that you can use the brackets. The brackets are next to the P button. The left-hand bracket makes it smaller. Right-hand bracket makes it larger. I'm going to reduce the opacity of the bottom layer just so this way when I do my drawing I can see where I've done so far. The other way you can do this is you can use a different color than black and then later on change the color of all of the painting of the outline over to black after the fact. But to get away from doing that, I'm just going to use a lower opacity layer. Now notice that I'm taking the time and making sure that I'm clicking on this pixel layer. It is extremely important that you switch back to this because if you draw on top of your background layer, basically you're just drawing on top of something that we're trying to squeeze paint between essentially, which is impossible to do. So you want to make sure that you're on your blank pixel layer, otherwise you're doing a lot of work for nothing. The hardest part about this project is trying to stay on the lines that you've already done, but you actually don't need to. If you see corrections that you need to do or you want to change the way something looks, by all means do that as you're going through here. In my example, when I first was introducing this project, which should be this one here, this is kind of almost like a finished product. We were doing this in class, and there was things that I changed. I even added nostrils the second time around. I added the shadows, all different things like that in order to enhance my image. So you essentially are going to do the same exact thing for yours. So don't go drive yourself crazy. It doesn't have to be perfect. So yeah, pretty much just have fun with it, and let's go from there. So I'm going to start off with the top up here. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow along with my brushes. Notice that I am I'm not worried about following this exactly. I'm going to basically just try to get as close as possible. I didn't like the way that looked. That's why I kind of did the little black scribble out there. Again, because I wasn't worried about what the actual drawing wound up looking like. Because I knew that I was going to be tracing it and that I could change it when I go to trace it. So basically, as I said, you're going to sit here and you are going to trace every last little bit of this. I'm going to wind up drawing through all of this, fast forwarding over the next couple minutes here, so this way you don't have to sit here and listen to me talk about random stuff, because that would be extremely boring content. So I'm just going to sit here and trace all of this, and we'll pick up from when I am done drawing these black lines. Okay, so you can see that I finally finished my drawing here. Notice that I did wind up turning it off halfway through, getting down the neck of the dragon here. It's not important what your original drawing winds up looking like. Again, you're going to wind up doing a finished product. It's just like as if animators for, just say, Disney or Pixar, they're doing all their drawings ahead of time, their sketches, to kind of fine-tune what they're going to have the drawings look like. Then they bring that in, and then they can make changes as they see fit. If you look at early drawings of any cartoon, a lot of times the person drew it one way and it winds up being another way later on as they fine-tune the way that they want their characters to look like. A prime example, if any of you guys watch The Simpsons, for Homer and Bart and even Marge and the baby and Lisa, they look incredibly different compared to even the way that the series started way back in the extreme early 90s or late 80s. I forget when exactly it started. But the characters look completely different compared to now compared to what they did back then. One thing as you notice that I'm coming in here and I'm doing now is I'm making sure that, first of all my blacks are solid. I did miss a couple little spots. I'm also making sure that my lines basically create a solid shape. One of the steps that we're going to do later on in this project is we're basically, after we're done coloring, we're going to select this outside area on this layer that we just created with this magic wand tool that's over here. When we select that, it should only select the outside. And then what we'll do is we'll literally click every single layer and hit delete, and it'll delete any stray marks that you may have outside your character. So this way, when you do put it on some kind of background, if that's what you choose to do, or later on, if you choose to put this in an environment, you don't have any extra stray marks that may be there that may become glaring, especially as additional colors come into play, or even a white background. So yeah, so just make sure that you have a nice clean image. The lines, we're not particularly worried how they look in totality now. We're kind of worrying about that later on. If we need to sharpen a line, make a line thicker, or fix an edge, we can do that in the end before we say, hey, I have my completed project. Again, you're just going to make sure that your lines are connected for right now. Make sure that if you see some lines that you don't like the way that they finished off, do come in here and straighten them up, sharpen them up if you want them that way. Some work now will lead to less work later on, so by all means, do what you need to do with it. Make sure that if you want something to be symmetrical on both sides, like I want the way that these horns come in to be the same on both. So that's what I'm working on. So this is how we get started. So I'm going to show you the next part. In part 2 is going to be how you're going to color this, but this is how you get it started. If you have any questions, please let me know, and we'll go from there. Hello everyone, this is part 2 of the character design. We're going to talk about how to start to color your image. The first thing that you need to do is you need to add an additional layer. So I'm going to add a pixel layer right here. Remember that's the button next to the trash can. Notice that it did pop up at the top, so you need to make sure you pull that down so it's under your tracing layer. The reason why we want it under the tracing layer is so this way when we do put in those colors, we don't have to worry about like staying between all the lines. We can literally just draw through the lines because the lines are going to be on top. So obviously, since this is a dragon, I'm going to do some kind of greenish color. So let me go to my color palette. If you don't have swatches available, go into your studio options and pull that up. I like clicking on this, and you can choose any of the ones that are already there. Or you can go down here into the Pantone colors, which are awesome color palettes for you to work with. I generally like to stick with these just because if you ever decide to do any like t-shirt designing or anything like that, a lot of the t-shirt companies, they'll ask for the Pantone colors, and you can get which Pantone color you actually are using by hovering over that. You can see how it's Global Color 1. You'll wind up seeing additional information on some of the other Pantone colors as you use them. As I hover over this brownish color, you can see that's Pantone 7551C. That would be the numbers that you would give to the t-shirt company, and then this way they can match your design exactly the way that you intended it to be. So I'm going to scroll all the way down here to get some kind of green. I kind of like this one here. It's a little more on the browner side, maybe even a little bit darker just to start with, and I can add in some highlights later on. So again, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with my brush sizes, and I'm going to get this a little bit larger just to get this one big stretch of coloring done at one time. One thing I do like to do though is, however, I like to come into towards the edges with a smaller brush first. This way I have a little bit more control of what I'm going to be doing. With a larger brush, you do have less control in the sense of where it does color. Pretty much the larger brush, you're kind of just getting in a larger area. Smaller brush, you're trying to get those little fine details. The small brushes do tend to be a little bit more sharper lines, which is the negative aspect of that. So you kind of want to try to find that little happy medium brush, so this way you still have control, but you're not creating these sharp lines and thin lines that you can't necessarily work with. So pick your battles and go with what you feel comfortable with. Notice that I'm trying to do these in large strokes. I have a lot of experience with being able to color things using my mouse, so I have a little bit more control. I can do larger stretches. If you don't have that control, you're definitely going to want to do smaller ones. Other than that, I'm going to fast forward through this next couple minutes. You can see I'm going to just color through this whole background, just so this way I have this nice green color across the entire dragon. So you can see I've colored in the whole body of my dragon here. One of the things that you may have also noticed is I colored over the eyes, but I did leave the teeth open. The reason why I left the teeth open is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add another layer in the background instead. I'm going to add in kind of a little bit of a yellowish tint. I kind of want that a little bit darker. So maybe I'd choose down in this row here, or maybe even like a beige. color, and I'm going to color that behind my green, which is why I left that open. The reason why I'm doing that is just so this way it makes it a lot easier just to be able to come in here and just randomly start coloring in. You can see that because I have those layers on top, basically it automatically creates those shapes. As I get closer to the edges, this is where I am starting to make my brush a little bit smaller, so this way I can, once again, control the brush. Over here, I did mess up a little bit, so I'm going to come in with the eraser and just fix that real quick because I added some stray marks. You can also see I added some stray marks here and there with the green, so I'm going to just go back up to that layer and erase out those little sections. I'm going to do a couple more minor touch-ups, essentially, of the black that's here and the green, and draw my eyes and the horns, and then I'll get back to you with more directions. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is just in case you do have something that you really didn't like the way that it went up looking like in the end, there's a way to change it. Notice that I added different layers here for a reason. This layer right here, which is the horns, notice that I went over just a little bit. I can pull this down underneath that green layer, and those little extra little spots now go away. For the project itself, I don't like the way that the teeth turned out. I think it's too yellow or too beige or whatever it may be. Maybe it's not yellow enough. Whatever it may be, I'm not happy with how the teeth look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an adjustments layer to just this layer in order to change the color. So I'm going to hit hue and saturation adjustment. You can also hit recolor, but both of them do work. But for this case, I'm just going to hit hue and saturation adjustment. I'm going to pull this down into as a clipping mask. Remember to change something as a clipping mask. You grab this square right here, you drag it down and in, and that now will only adjust the layer that we are working with now. That's really important because if this were above the other layers, this would adjust all of the layers instead. So you can see now I can come in here and I can change this the teeth basically to any color that I want, changing the hue and saturation. I maybe like to see a little bit more of like a white, so actually I'm going to turn these almost into a gray, and I'm going to mess with these until I find something I like. So these are straight up white because I put the luminosity shift at 100 and the saturation at -100. That literally took out all of the color out of it, and by putting the luminosity shift all the way up, it makes it bright. Doing the opposite makes it black. So I'm going to hit merge because I don't want this sitting there anymore. If you wanted to be able to have the option of changing it again later on, you would just hit the red X, and that would allow you to change this saturation adjustment later on. So I'm just going to hit merge so this way I never see that again. I noticed that it didn't merge it like it was supposed to. I'm not sure why. I don't know if that's just a glitch, but I can look into that for further video. But it's not that important. I think if I left that above and then hit merge, it might have merged it with the layers. Maybe because I added it as a clipping mask. Maybe that's the reason why. But we'll just leave it as is for now. I'll just collapse the menu, and then I don't have to worry about that anymore. The other thing I want to talk about is when I was coloring the eyes. If you notice that what I did was I came in here and I picked a few different reds and I turned on wet edges. What that does is it makes the paintbrush almost like semi-transparent, or the opacity down a little bit. And then this way, as it's going over, the more times that you go over a particular area, the more deep and opaque that color becomes. The wet edges allows those colors to kind of blend in a little bit, which is how we're going to essentially make our image have a little bit three-dimensional texture to it if we wanted to. Like say for these ridges right here for this green, what I would do is I would come here to my green, I would bring it back. Notice I'm in the swatches panel. That gives me my recent little blocks here. I'm going to go to the colors, and I get to choose by going under the wheel or the sliders how I want this color to be. I don't necessarily like to work with the wheel. The sliders usually is how I like to work with, and I come here to the CYMK, which allows me to either brighten my image or darken my image. I'm going to bring up a lighter color to start with, and that will allow me to add some brights onto these ridges here, and that will basically kind of create a little bit of a three-dimensional effect because it's kind of like where those lights are bouncing off of. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a darker version, and I'm going to do that over top of where these black lines are, and that will create like those little shadow divots, which again will help with that three-dimensional effect that I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue through this. Basically, I don't want you to pay attention to what I'm doing for the rest. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm just coming in here, putting in shadows where I believe there should be shadows. And then beyond that is pretty much open to interpretation and my own creativity, whatever I want to do in order to make this look like a dragon the way that I want it to. So it's all up to you. Have fun with this, and if you have any questions, let me know. And with the project, I'll post what my image looks like later on in the project, so this way you kind of get an idea of where I finished out in the end. So if you have any questions, let me know. If not, have fun with this project. It's just a nice little fun project for us to end this school year. All right, enjoy and good luck.